Imagine a legendary pirate, right? A real swashbuckling rebel who vanished with a fortune. I mean, a fortune so vast it actually kicked off the first global manhunt.
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
But what if his disappearance wasn't just a clever escape? What if this king of pirates wasn't simply a rogue, but maybe an agent? A shadow figure playing a much bigger game on the grand chessboard of empires.
Hmm, that's the question, isn't it?
Was he just a daring freebooter, or was he something more? Maybe something even weirder. Welcome to Cool, Weird, and Possible.
Glad to be diving into this one.
Today, we're embarking on a deep dive, a really fascinating and often unsettling one, into the legend of Henry Every and his fabled lost treasure.
We're going to pull back the curtain a bit on the shifting tides of power in the 17th century Indian Ocean.
Right. And the explosive rise of global commerce and those blurry, often, let's be honest, self-serving lines between rebel, pirate, and, well, state actor.
Exactly. Our mission really is to unpack these accounts. Some paint every as, brutal marauder.
And others almost elevate him to a folk hero. It's wild. We need to examine those surprising connections that hint at maybe deeper, more complex forces at play behind the scenes.
Yeah, this isn't just a simple adventure tale. It's really a look at how history gets written and sometimes maybe how it's deliberately obscured.
Okay, so to really get Henry Everett, we need to set the scene, right? Late 17th century.
Absolutely. And you have to understand, this was a brutal era if you worked at sea. Conditions on merchant ships, naval ships, they were incredibly harsh.
Like forced recruitment, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. Forced recruitment, grueling daily life, terrible pay, and discipline that could, well, push anyone over the edge. It was a world just ripe for mutiny, for rebellion.
And that line between legit service and piracy must have been pretty thin sometimes.
Very thin. And Henry Airy himself, he was born in Devon, England. He actually started as a midshipman in the Royal Navy, so he had a proper background.
Okay, so not just some random guy off the docks.
No, not at all. But clearly, by 1694, the rigid structure, the often oppressive nature of naval life, it wasn't for him anymore.
So, May 7th, 1694, what happens?
He and a group of conspirators are aboard the Charles II. It's a 46-gun privateer, technically in Spanish service, anchored in A Coruña, Spain.
A privateer. So like state-sanctioned piracy, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. Commissioned by a government to attack enemy ships. But and his mates, they had their own ideas. They pull off a successful mutiny.
And the captain.
They set Captain Gibson ashore. And then, really dramatically, they renamed the Charles II the Fancy.
The Fancy, okay. Not just a name change, then.
No, it was a statement, a declaration of independence, you could say, a clean break.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more, though. A mutiny is bold, sure, but the sources say Every offered Captain Gibson a peaceful departure. Let him just walk away.
That's what the account suggests, yeah.
That sounds almost, well, gentlemanly, doesn't it, for the guy who'd become the king of pirates? The historical accounts mention him having a shrewd, pragmatic side, a sort of calculated approach to leadership. So, was he just being practical here? Or is this a hint? Was he already thinking bigger, maybe playing a longer game than just grabbing a ship?
Well, what's really fascinating right after the mutiny is how quickly he starts building this new identity for the Fancy and the crew.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't just, rampaging wildly.
Oh, how so?
Our sources show he used deception, like pretending to be a merchant ship to lure Guinean villagers on board, then seizing their gold dust, subjecting them to forced labor.
Wow. Okay, not so gentlemanly there.
Not at all. And he even attacked Danish merchants, falsely claiming England and Denmark were at war. That's not just random opportunism.
No, that sounds like manipulation planning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It points to a really calculating mind. Someone who understood how to twist situations, exploit weaknesses, even create false narratives to get what he wanted right from the start.
So the records emphasize this ruthless decisions and intricate planning stuff from day one.
Pretty much, yeah. Right from the beginning of his independent command.
Okay, so this is where the story really blows up, right? Goes from mutiny to something bigger, global almost.
This is it. His sights were set on the Red Sea, late 17th century. This is a major artery for global trade and also for pilgrimage.
The Hajj.
Precisely. So by 1695, Every and his crew, now over 150 guys, they position themselves really strategically in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's this narrow choke point pirates called the Babs.
Smart. They knew the rich ships had to pass through there.
They knew the wealthy pilgrim ships returning from Mecca would be funneling right through, loaded.
And the big one. The Ganges Sawe. Tell me about that ship. It wasn't just any ship, was it?
Oh, absolutely not. This is the
Yes.
personal ship of the Grand Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, one of the most powerful rulers on Earth at the time.
Seriously, the emperor's own ship.
Yep, one of the largest ships in the world, absolutely packed with wealth, gold, silver, Arabian coins, just an immense fortune.
And it was carrying pilgrims, too.
Yes. Crucially, pilgrims returning from the Hajj. That's a sacred journey in Islam, a huge cultural event, bringing together people from all over the Mughal Empire and beyond, attacking this ship.
Mhm.
It wasn't just theft.
No, it was like spitting in the eye of a global superpower and a major religion, a huge symbol.
Did they know?
Yeah.
Did they know a royal might be on board?
It's possible they suspected, given its status. So you have this massive, symbolic, heavily laden ship, and then you have every's fancy what actually went down when they met.
Yeah, what happened? Must have been quite a fight.
The capture of the Ganges Hawaii, it was definitely one of history's most lucrative acts of piracy. Maybe the most. The treasure seized was just extraordinary. Hundreds of thousands of pounds sterling back then. Unbelievable amount of money.
Wow. But the accounts of what happened on board, they differ, right?
They differ sharply, yeah.
Yeah.
And it gets pretty grim. Mobile sources like the historian Kafi Khan, he wrote detailed accounts. He talks about the pirates plundering, obviously, but also committing just extreme acts of dishonor against the women.
Yeah, horrific stuff. Some women apparently took their own lives to preserve their dignity. Others used daggers on themselves. Just awful.
And the English sources, did they mention this?
Some do. Like a later confession from one of Every's crewmen, John Spark. He admits to horrid barbarities, but then tries to kind of excuse it, saying it was only on the bodies of heathens.
Ugh. Still admitting terrible violence, though.
Absolutely. It's a really stark reminder of the brutality involved, something that often gets, smoothed over in the romantic pirate stories.
So this single attack, the fallout must have been immense.
Immediate and global.
Yeah.
This wasn't just another pirate raid. This sparked what many call the world's first international manhunt for Henry Every.
The first one. Really?
Quite possibly, yeah. Anglo-Mughal relations just went into freefall. Emperor Aurangzeb was furious. He threatened to kick all Europeans out of his empire if Every wasn't caught.
Which would have been catastrophic for trade.
Hugely. Especially for the East India Company. They were already facing problems back in England, financial issues, political pressure. This attack became an existential crisis for them. It genuinely reshaped the global economy, not just by the theft, but by forcing this whole reevaluation of maritime law, imperial responsibility.
Okay, so you've got this unprecedented global outcry. A massive bounty on his head from the East India Company, like millions in today's money, right?
Fortune, yeah.
And yet, Henry just vanishes. Poof. Gone.
Completely.
Yeah.
Him and that colossal treasure hoard never officially found.
But some of his crew did turn up. Where was that?
Yeah, some resurfaced, especially in the American colonies, New England specifically.
And they just blended back in with pirate treasure.
Well, the sources suggest they managed it through what sounds like a pretty sophisticated money laundering scheme. Paying off officials, buying land, seemingly integrating back into society.
Okay, wait. That just makes Every's disappearance even weirder. How does the most wanted man on the planet just disappear while his crew are kind of setting up shop in the colonies?
That's the multi-million-pound question, isn't it?
Could his actions, the attack itself, and then this vanishing act, could it have been part of something bigger? Maybe unofficial? Was he really just a pirate king? Or was he a spy? Or maybe even just a pawn in some larger game?
Well, this period, it's fascinating because the lines between state interest, privateering, and outright piracy were incredibly blurred. Actions like Every's, even though they were publicly condemned, could indirectly benefit imperial powers like Britain.
How so?
The British government had a long history of using privateers, right? They'd issue letters of marque, basically licenses to pirate enemy ships, and take a cut of the profits.
Okay, so state-sponsored piracy was already a thing.
Definitely. And Every's piracy, while totally illegal and incredibly violent, did have the effect of destabilizing Mughal trade. It weakened their naval presence indirectly. And that created opportunities for rising powers, like the East India Company.
And the East India Company again.
Yeah.
So the crisis he caused actually helped them.
In a way, yeah. It actually propelled the company into this new role as enforcers of maritime law. They basically had to build up their own naval power to protect their interests, which further intertwined their economic and military power. So, yeah, disruption, even criminal disruption, can sometimes serve unexpected political goals.
That is murky. What about the crew they did catch? What happened to them?
The trials back in London are really revealing. Shows how narratives get shaped. Initially, the jury actually acquitted the pirates they caught.
Acquitted them. Why?
Could be a few reasons. Maybe that romanticized view of pirates, the folk hero thing. Or maybe just a disconnect. I mean, like, the victims were far away, foreign. The jury didn't connect.
So the authorities weren't happy with that outcome?
Not at all. So they pivoted strategically. They recharged the crew, but this time focused on the mutiny, the original takeover of the Charles II.
Ah, so they made the victim a British captain and a British ship.
Exactly. A more relatable victim for the London jury. And that worked. They got convictions. It really shows how the legal system could be maneuvered to get the desired result and shape how the public saw things.
It's amazing how the official story was managed, but then you had this other narrative bubbling up in popular culture. You mentioned ballads.
Oh yeah, the Every Verses. It was a super popular ballad, circulated widely, and it paints him as this aspiring hero, almost like Robin Hood. Grabs the treasure, sails off to live happily ever after.
Not exactly mentioning the horrid barbarities.
Not so much, no. And there was even a play in London called The Successful Pirate.
Seriously, a play?
Yep. It imagined him marrying a Mughal princess and living in luxury. Complete fantasy, but hugely popular.
Why were these heroic, sensationalized stories so common? Was it just people loving a good adventure yarn, or was something else going on? Was it maybe a deliberate distraction, crafting a myth to hide the uglier truths or the deeper state connections?
Well, you got to remember the power of print culture back then. It was just starting to boom. Ballads, pamphlets, plays, that was the mass media.
Right.
And they had immense power to shape how people saw things. These sensational accounts definitely amplified every image, built up this romantic legend that was often, miles away from the reality for his victims.
So it wasn't just entertainment.
Not always, no.
Yeah.
It could really shape public opinion, political realities. By presenting this sanitized, even heroic version, it maybe offered a kind of counter-narrative. It let the government publicly condemn him while maybe quietly benefiting from the chaos he caused. It's like an early form of spin, managing public perception through stories.
Wow. So when we boil it all down, what does this story mean for us now? The lost treasure, the vanishing act, the whole myth, it feels like more than just a hunt for gold.
It really is. It speaks to these fundamental questions about power, about defiance, about rebellion against systems, and critically, about how history itself gets written, or like you said, maybe rewritten.
It's just incredible, isn't it, how one guy's actions could ripple outwards like that, affecting global politics, trade, but also how we still talk about heroes and villains today.
Absolutely.
He was labeled enemy of all mankind, officially, but in some ways he became the symbol of rebellion. Especially when you hear about pirate ships sometimes having these weirdly democratic structures.
That's another fascinating layer, yeah.
Yeah.
When you look at figures like the label pirate becomes really slippery. It depends entirely on who's telling the story and why.
Right.
And ironically, yes, many pirate ships had structures that were, well, remarkably democratic for their time, compared to a Royal Navy ship or merchant vessel anyway.
Like what?
Sources mention things like elected captains, the crew voting on major decisions, even systems for sharing plunder fairly and providing for injured crewmates like basic welfare. A huge contrast to the rigid hierarchy and harsh discipline elsewhere.
So democratic structures, but also extreme violence.
Exactly. That's the paradox. They had these almost egalitarian setups internally, but their external actions involved extreme violence and plunder. It mirrors some aspects of early asymmetric warfare, small groups hitting powerful systems hard.
It really complicates things, makes it hard to draw simple good versus evil lines.
It does. This historical complexity, it challenges those easy ethical conclusions. It reminds us history is rarely black and white. There are always layers, different perspectives, hidden motives.
So ultimately, Henry, every story, it's not just about finding a chest full of gold.
No, it's about that constant tension, isn't it, between state power and individual rebellion.
Right.
It's about the stories we tell ourselves, the narratives we build. And it's about who gets to control that narrative, who gets to shape history.
And Every himself, he just vanished, left behind all that treasure and this massive question mark. Did he just melt away into obscurity with his loot, find some quiet corner of the world?
That's one possibility. The simple explanation.
Or was his disappearance something else, something deliberate? Maybe even orchestrated by people in power to tidy up a messy situation, to control a story that blurred those uncomfortable lines between crime and, well, imperial ambition. It definitely leaves you wondering, doesn't it?
It certainly does. A mystery for the ages.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the very curious case of Henry Every. It's been fascinating.
My pleasure. It's a story that never gets old.
If you enjoyed this journey into the cool, weird, and possible corners of history, definitely be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next adventure.